everyone, and welcome to the second annual Tankersley Laureate Lecture. I'm Jennifer Jenkins. I'm a faculty member in the Southwest Center and a film historian here at the University of Arizona. Briefly, I just want to explain that the Southwest Center is a center on campus dedicated to the study of northern Mexico and the Arizona-Sonora borderlands across the disciplines. And we were the beneficiary of an endowment from Mrs. Bazy Tankersley, in whose name this lecture series was established. It's especially poignant, I think, to have this topic and this dedication to J.C. Mutchler, because he was instrumental in establishing the Bear Canyon Center for Southwest Humanities, which is currently located on the ranch owned by Mrs. Tankersley. And he was also quite instrumental in getting the efforts to preserve Camp Naco together. So in a moment, you will see a tribute video put together by our own Carlos Quintero, and you will hear from a lot of JC's colleagues and friends and loved ones about his impact in this region. I just wanted to take a moment to share my own experience. I'm not in the video, so my own experience with JC. And you will hear from people that, first and foremost, JC was a gentleman, and that is true. You will also hear that he was constantly pushing people's curiosity, and that is also true. And that most people could identify him by his jeans and boots and hat, which the love of his life, Lissa Howe, was kind enough to bring for us to honor tonight. And he was really a bridge between town and gown, but I was trying to think of a better metaphor because it wasn't really town and gown. It was like goat and gown or something, but that doesn't feel quite right. At any rate, the goats are a through line here. I met JC when I sat next to him in the faculty senate, and I was a baby professor and didn't quite know what I was doing there. And people speak in the video about his empathy for outliers, and I was definitely one. And we just chatted, and my dad grew up in West Texas, and we had lots to talk about that particular kind of life. He told me about the goats, and I made my mark in faculty senate by saying quietly, "What do you do with them in the wintertime?" And it was really noisy in the Senate chamber. And then I said, not that loudly, "Do they wear sleepers?" Except the room went quiet right when I said that. So that's how people knew who I was. The Chivarisa cheese was something that I told Lissa earlier. It was really the only thing my mother could tolerate when she was going through chemotherapy. And I was so happy to be able to share that with JC, who just beamed. It was really, really lovely. So you will hear Andrew Comrie talk about JC's guy next door charm. And at this point, I will ask you to enjoy the video. When it ends, then we'll turn the talk over to our guests for tonight, Brooks Jeffrey and Becky Orozco, giving the talk Preserving Place and Empowering Community, the Past, Present, and Future of Camp Naco. But right now, I'd like you to spend a little time with JC and the people who love him. Thank you.
Honored to be part of the sharing of memories of my friend and colleague, J.C. Mutchler. JC and I intersected often on our serendipitous parallel roads that took us both to New Haven at Yale Graduate School and later on here to Arizona. It seems appropriate to talk about memories, and particularly to talk about memories, because JC loved to talk, and I loved talking with JC. He was always willing to listen. He was always willing to share ideas. I am filled with memories of JC, particularly not just JC talking, but JC in action. I'm standing here in my backyard, in part because here's one of my favorite memories of JC, is of manning the barbecue during our annual monsoon barbecues here in Tucson.
I first met J.C. Mutchler in the late 2000s when he was Secretary of the Faculty and member of the Faculty Senate Executive Committee. I got to know him well and worked closely with him when I became University of Arizona's provost in 2012. J.C. had just completed a term as chair of the Arizona Faculty's Council. That's an elected role in which he represented the faculty of all three public universities at meetings of the Arizona Board of Regents. Like many people who knew JC, I found him to be a warm, thoughtful, and friendly person. He was authentic to his roots in land and place, as well as to his scholarship and intellect.
I feel very lucky to have worked with JC in the Southwest Center for his all too brief time here. JC was an incredibly generous person, thoughtful. He just had such an amazing ability to engage with people from all over the place and to interpret landscapes and to be a part of them and to understand his place in them and to share that with others and write about it, and all of that experience, I think, was reflected in his scholarship, but also in his very community-minded orientation. And he brought that to the Southwest Center as well. And those are things that I really very much appreciate and learn from J.C. Mutchler.
Very early on, in the early 2000s, I was working first with Elder Hostel and then teaching for Cochise College. And I'd gotten to know JC through a number of programs there, and I brought him out here. And the day that I brought him here, he said, you know what, we need to quit our jobs, move out here and save this place. And we, kind of backed off from that a little bit, but that started his work here. And part of that was getting his students involved in the process, which has collected the history that has led in many ways to us being able to save this amazing place.
I was a student of J.C. Mutchler's at the University of Arizona South. I believe I sat in his very first class that he taught at the institution. J.C. was one of the most influential people in my career path. He was supportive, encouraging, and I'll be forever grateful for the influence that he had in my life.
I met JC, I think, at the Western History Association annual meeting well more than a decade ago, and what I was really struck by was here was this big kind of Western looking guy with boots, which in and of itself is not so unusual at the Western History meeting, but two of my friends who have fairly fancy jobs and went to graduate school at Yale sort of descended on JC and embraced him in hugs and catching up, and I thought, who is this guy? And I myself kind of had a foot in both worlds of rural Arizona history and sort of East Coast academia. And I realized that JC was somebody who had bridged that wide gap in such a fascinating way.
Like Annie, I was a student of his. My first history class at University of Arizona South was with Dr. Mutchler. And I always remember the hat. As soon as you walk in, you don't know what to expect. But he was a mentor and a guide. And he encouraged you and he guided you to expand your knowledge. He shared his knowledge and passion of the borderlands. And you quickly learned so much and you wanted to learn that much more. So I took every class possible that I could with him in pursuit of my history degree.
JC had a double life. He had a life here in Cochise County and was an advocate for Camp Naco, which is where I met him first around 2006, when he, like Becky, were just champions trying to organize people who could bring some expertise to, in my case, the preservation of the buildings and provide some documentation and advice on what they should do first. And then the other life was really at the University of Arizona campus in Tucson, where, as was described earlier, here's this guy in cowboy boots, jeans, and a big cowboy hat walking through campus as the special assistant to President Hart. And so here was this contrast of an East Coast oriented president of the university, along with this clearly base placed gentleman who was able to really kind of bring some gravitas to the kinds of strategic direction for the University of Arizona as a land-grant college. And he excelled in both of those areas. And I'm grateful for his friendship, and the reason I'm here also is because of him.
I have wonderful memories of his marriage to the beautiful Alyssa in the historic Tumacacori Church, of him showing off his goats in Vale and later on in Hereford, about him striding through the halls, administrative halls in the main campus in his signature hat and cowboy boots.
JC's faculty leadership successes ultimately led to him being appointed in 2013 as executive director of the president's office, essentially a chief of staff role. Beyond the usual skills, that position required something that many might have guessed would push JC out of his comfort zone. And that was the need to wear a suit all the time. Perhaps surprisingly, he sort of owned the suit idea. And I think he even had some suits made to order. He seemed to relish that transformation from cowboy and goat keeper to a dapper executive.
About 10 years ago, I went out to his ranch and to see the goat cheese operation with what was then my young son and my husband. And, you know, I had the son growing up in Washington, D.C., who went to this goat dairy and farm and house where the goats went in and out of the house. And it was an unbelievably special experience for my family and kind of captured what was unique about JC as an intellectual and as a person.
One of my favorite stories of spending time with JC is when I first came to Naco, and I had never been to Naco before, and we toured Camp Naco, and we were looking at it as a project, right? So we were looking at it, you know, how can I bring students here to use it as a spring break kind of field school? He said, well, I need to take you to the Gay 90s bar, which is the bar that sits in Naco, and it's the only real sort of business in Naco. And so it's like, okay. And those of you who don't know, JC doesn't drink. And so he was there really not to go and have a drink, but it was there as the laboratory to watch people. And he said, you need to come to the place where the stories are being told in the community. And it was at the Gay 90s.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I really remember is going down to visit JC on his ranch, on his goat ranch that was right on the border near Naco, and well, between Sierra Vista and Naco, La Chivarrisa. And even in his, even with his compromised health, we were walking along the border, and he had a big oxygen pack or an oxygen machine on him, strapped to his back, but there we were, walking along the border, and he was talking about life, living right on the wall, on the fence, the border line, and I just could really appreciate how much JC was so present in the world, so a part of his surroundings and engaging with what was happening around him, and bringing that to his scholarship as well.
Well, I think he believed in community history, the idea that the history of the place then transcends and imprints on you the sense of identity, and to build pride in identity of a place and of the people, you need to know its history in order to continue that legacy. And that's what JC advocated for in his teaching as well as his work.
And I think when I hear you all talk about JC, what I hear is empathy, historical empathy for historical actors. And I think JC took it further with empathy for the community. And that's very moving.
He was genuinely interested in people and in finding real solutions to the many challenges in running a world-class university. I will say that JC's skills in helping groups find consensus by gently nudging conversation this way and that were an absolute masterclass, demonstrating how the very best leaders lead by doing things with rather than to the people that they lead.
And it's, again, he ignited that passion. And that was around what, 2004, 2005? And I'm still here today researching, never giving up, looking for those answers. That we started with some brief oral histories. And again, he just guided you along the way and just helped you, stay on that path to learn the answers for history, for all those avenues of history, and just never giving up. So again, I am here today because of him.
And I think he took his role as a mentor very seriously,
Yes.
right? And so, part of his identity as a professor was also not just to profess knowledge, but to, again, impart the passion and the tools by which the next generation can then tell the story, and that builds a whole community that, again, builds pride in that community.
I'll remember JC for being a considerate, approachable, can-do kind of person who also never gave up his guy next door charm and always put his highest ideals first.
And just a very kind and generous-hearted person, and I deeply miss him. I really regret not having had the chance to work more closely with JC Mutchler in the Southwest Center at the University of Arizona.
He, would be in contact every now and then to talk about opportunities, see if I'd be interested in, doing projects, and so he didn't just drop his students after a class or after even they left the university. He really cemented lasting relationships with us.
But that is a regret that he is not here to see so much of what we've been doing, and he is greatly missed.
He's one of those people that you always had at your back, that he would be there as a supporter for the project.
And so in some ways he is here with us.
I echo the love and admiration that comes through these memories and these memoirs. I miss JC. Yeah, I miss his barbecue ribs. But what I continue to miss, but also continue to be inspired by, is his integrity, is his spirit, his joy in life, and his commitment to integrity. So, thank you.
Thank you to everyone who contributed to it, and especially Carlos for editing it together. It's a really nice tribute. I'm going to introduce Rebecca and Brooks in just a sec, but before I do that, I need to say some thank yous and acknowledgments to the Center for Creative Photography for allowing us to use this wonderful room, to Terrence Smith with the Naco Heritage Alliance, who's helping with this event and tomorrow's, to the Southwest Center, of course, to the Bear Canyon Center for Southwest Humanities, which funds the Tankersley Lecture, the City of Bisbee, the SWABs, which is Southwest Association of Buffalo Soldiers. Whew, got it. Okay. And finally, and we would be nowhere without them, the Naco Heritage Alliance. And before the formal talk begins, can I remind you please to silence your cell phones? Thank you. Okay, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you this year's Tankersley laureates, Rebecca Orozco, whom you saw in the video, and Brooks Jeffrey, whom you also saw in the video. And they're going to lead us through the process of preserving place and empowering community at Camp Naco. So, Becky and Brooks.
Okay, so I met JC, as I said, at showing him Camp Naco, getting to know him there. Camp Naco, for those who haven't been there, and hopefully some of you will be able to make the trip down there tomorrow, is a cantonment from Fort Huachuca that was established in 1919. It took the place of a series of tent camps that had been established all along the border over the previous 10 years of the Mexican Revolution. Some of the major battles of the Mexican Revolution took place in Naco, and they sent troops there, basically the first border patrol, to keep the war from spilling across the border. And the ones who were mostly in Camp Naco, we've had some National Guard, but they were the 9th and 10th Cavalry and the 25th Infantry, the Buffalo Soldiers, who served there pretty much continually from 1916 through 1924. And their job was to keep that war on the south side of the border. The picture at the top of the photo here is the camp as it was being built. After World War I, the decision was made to make those tent camps all along the border permanent. And so there was somewhere between 35 and 50 of the camps. We're still doing research. John sent us some new stuff just the other day on how many of the camps there were. Some of them had, the Camp Naco lasted because it was built of adobe as a permanent camp. The others were some adobe, but Camp Naco is still there. And as I said, it was the home for first the 9th Cavalry, then the 10th, and then finally the 25th Infantry. But it was made into that permanent camp in 1919 under the final days of the Wilson presidency, going into the Warren Harding presidency. But then Harding died in office, and his replacement, Calvin Coolidge, said, you know what? Not Calvin Coolidge, anyway, let's go back to a return to normalcy. And the camps were abandoned. And this is a picture taken in an inventory of the camps, an aerial inventory by the military in 1923. So next years, the family who had originally had the property moved there. They lived there for the next 40 years, well until 1990. When they sold it, the Newell family could no longer, Mrs. Newell was getting on in years and she could no longer maintain the property. They sold it to Vision Quest, who was a for-profit juvenile treatment group who wanted to put a camp there. But they weren't able to get the zoning information they needed to do that. So over the 90s, they had moved everybody out and it began to deteriorate. Well, the end of the 90s is when I stumbled on the camp. I came down there I had worked at Elder Hostel at Cochise College, and they brought me back to direct those programs in the early 2000s. About 1999, came across this camp, and I thought it'd be a great place to bring groups. And so I got a hold of Vision Quest, and they said, yeah, you can bring groups, but we're looking for somebody. If you can find somebody who'll preserve it, we'll give it to them. Which started a 25-year roller coaster ride that just recently finally got to the top. The camp, because no one was living there and it was open to vandalism and people, it was party central for Bisbee High School for many of those years. It had undergone a great deal of damage. You can look in the roof there. One day I came back out about 2005 and the copper wire thieves had hit and ripped out all of the ceilings, stealing the copper wire from the original electricity. So over these years, it had suffered a lot. And again, that up and down. I was helping the town of Naco with some brownfields grants, and that funding had called for community meetings. And we used that for the first convenings of the meetings that JC came down. We met with the community. We began to say, what do you want to see happen here? And that was the early 2000s. First time Brooks came, and JC was very involved in those discussions. But the camp continued on downhill. Nothing, there was a little bit of money here, a little bit of money there. Vision Quest wasn't putting anything into it. And the buildings, well, they're 100-year-old buildings. They were beginning to show the wear from the time that it was first constructed in 1919. And then the first arson fire happened. First arson fire happened in 2006, burned the junior officers' quarters. The buildings that I just showed you at construction burned in 2006, which then brought the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality into the picture, who said we needed to mitigate the asbestos because all the roofing material was asbestos, and fence the site because it was a hazard. And Vision Quest said, we'll bulldoze it first, it's a lot cheaper to do it that way. But they gave me a few days, or until they had to respond to ADEQ, to come up with an answer. Well, I hit the ground running, and I talked to just about everybody I could think of. I went to Washington, talked to all kinds of people. But I was also the college's representative on the Southeastern Arizona Governments Organization, and I went to them, and I talked to that's the second arson fire, that was 2010. I talked to them, and there was a mayor there, and he came forward and he says, you know what, Huachuca City will take it. And at that point, we didn't really care why Huachuca City was looking at taking the camp, because they were 40 miles away, because we had 4 days. And Huachuca City took possession of the camp, paid $10 for it in 2006. The mayor got recalled, and Huachuca City was a little bit saying, what the heck are we doing? But they were very good community stewards over the next years. As we fought things like the fire, but we also got a grant that that paid for mitigating the asbestos through Huachuca City with the help of Congresswoman Giffords, who stood up for us, who came to the camp, who really believed in what we were doing there. We also got a grant to fence the site. But again, this was kind of an uphill thing. JC in 2007 or 8 almost got the University of Arizona to take it on, but then there was a change in leadership and they backed back. 2008, the financial crisis caused another back off of that particular project. But so we just kept trying to find a way, but the buildings continued to deteriorate. With the grant for the asbestos, we were able to put new roof, as they removed the old roofing, we were able to put rolled roofing on, and that basically saved the buildings. But again, there was just little bits here and there, some stabilization, but still no answer, no big answer. Well, in 2015, we got an architectural firm, the firm that did it worked here at the University of Arizona. I think it was Poster Frost McMurdo then, now it's Poster McMurdo McDonald, who did the study for Old Main and several other buildings here on campus, did a master plan for us. Got a little grant from that. And that said what we needed to do on each of the buildings. We had lots of volunteer cleanup days, brought people in, all kinds of groups. The Buffalo Soldier motorcycle troopers, this was see a member back there, came down, did a lot of work for us, as did the Southwest Association of Buffalo Soldiers. All of these were one day just keeping the building standing, but still not a whole lot of progress. Well, that kind of changed. 2018, Bisbee, City of Bisbee, I finally twisted their arm hard enough that they took possession of the site from Huachuca City for $10 in 2018. And they were also really good stewards, but still not any money there to speak of. And then 2020, I got approached by a University of Arizona professor, Helen Erickson, who's here today, who said, I've got this student who wants to do a project, or I'm assigning my students projects to look at his National Register sites. Can she do Camp Naco? And I said, sure. Well, that led to the little story map that's on the bookmark that you hopefully picked up as you came in, which got us the attention of the State Historic Preservation Office, which encouraged us to apply for the 11 most endangered sites, and we got it, which led to the idea that we can save this site because the governor's office got interested, gave us $4.6 million in ARPA money. That was the bottom line on that historic preservation plan. And then the Mellon Foundation stepped forward as well. There's our story map picture. I've God, anyway. So the story map was sort of the key that brought the attention that we needed to move forward. The Mellon Foundation chooses 2 sites each year that basically the Buffalo Soldier connection, the diversity connection here is what got their attention. They gave us a grant as well for $3.5 million. So $8.1 million, I got struck by lightning, I think, maybe, or maybe it was the lottery win. But it's been an amazing ride this last couple of years.
So Becky has talked about the past, and I'm going to sort of focus on how we've beginning to define a future. And part of this was a roadmap that was laid out in the grant proposals, both to the state of Arizona as well as to the Mellon Foundation. And what becomes really important here is the fact that we needed to define a process. And so what I'm going to be walking you through is really a process whereby we took the vision of what there was in the grant proposals and began to then develop a roadmap to implement them. And so one of the first things that we did was we made sure that we understood what these outcomes needed to be. So we took a look at the grant proposals that were done, and we really boiled it down to 3 major outcomes. One was we needed to rehabilitate the Camp Naco site. So that includes the protect, preserve, and rehabilitate. These are preservation terms about this. Rehabilitate means it doesn't have to be restored back to its original use, but rather could be restored back to the fabric of the building, but have a new use. And that became very important in the language that we use as we move forward with the preservation of the site. We also had to understand that it wasn't just about the buildings. This was about a 17-acre site that we now had the opportunity to steward into the next generation and how we would do that. The second major outcome was community programming. And this is, I'm going to read this because I think it's really important, to develop place-based programming that celebrates the diverse historical narratives of Camp Naco as a foundation for historical and contemporary cultural production. And you can see the list of things there. Everything from scholarship to the storytelling that we talked about in JC's tribute video, to cuisine even. It's about new forms of cultural expression to be able to celebrate that place. The other major component of this was sustainable community development. If we were going to make Camp Naco sustainable into the future, this could not be a museum for the rest of its life. We needed to come up with sustainable economic development strategies that would diversify the income and revenue streams in order to make this, yes, a museum, but also it needed to be a resource for others in the community. And so the other third component then of these outcomes was organizational sustainability. The Mellon Foundation, in their wisdom, recognized that the mom and pop organization, the Naco Heritage Alliance, which has had 3 board members, Becky being one of them, and you met Debbie Schwartzweiler-Jones as the other board member, along with Bill Doley here from Archaeology Southwest, have been the board members for the last 20 plus years. And the Mellon Foundation recognized that if this is going to be a major operation, you needed to move away from this kind of working board to being a true governing board, as a nonprofit should. And so they invested in that, in organizational sustainability. So they put money into the grant to allow us to hire a board development consultant to be able to come in and amplify the board, professionalize the board, bring in the skills that were required in order to take this then to the next generation. They also determined that we needed to have somebody who could just launch things before they could actually have this board in place to make all of the governance decisions that were moving forward. And so they wrote in there a strategic planning consultant that would act as a startup executive director. That's the role I'm playing here. And so my job really is then to launch this project, set everything up, and including a board that would then recruit and then hire a permanent executive for the Naco Heritage Alliance who would continue to drive a sustainable vision then for Camp Naco as a project. So these are the major outcomes, and I wanted to share this with you because this is the roadmap that we're using in order to guide this process. So first thing that we did was we created a working vision. to be able to guide, kind of create this North Star of what we wanted to be. And so that vision is that we wanted Camp Naco to become a destination. And that destination had 3 pillars to it. One was to honor the legacy of the Buffalo Soldiers in the American Southwest, in other words, commemoration. The second, to advance the diverse arts and culture and history of the Arizona borderlands, culture. And the third, to serve as a community resource for the residents of Naco, Arizona, community. This idea that this is based in Naco, it needs to be a catalyst for how Naco puts itself on the map and to draw people there as a destination. So with this as our kind of guiding vision with its pillars, then, we move forward in a series of defining what those activities might be. So you can see in those 3 pillars, many of these particular activities, particularly these, the sort of top 4 or 5 here, were really the same as they went all across each of these pillars. But then you got down into various things that were specific to, for example, talking about the commemoration of the Buffalo Soldiers. The specific ones related to health and wellness or outdoor recreation. There's plans for artists and scholar housing and artists and scholars programming that would be there to advance the arts and culture component of this, as well as what are the resources that an unincorporated border community in southern Cochise County need. What they wanted healthcare, they want wellness, they want to be able to have a community center to be able to meet, because there's nothing really other than the gay 90s. There's no place really to meet in the community of Naco. And they also wanted workforce housing. They want to be able to develop the skills that were necessary to grow an economy and have a thriving lifestyle that is there. And so these were all the kinds of activities that we were taking in from a number of different community stakeholder events that we had. We then translated that into a framework that became this roadmap. And you can see this strategic planning framework, as complex as it looks, is really our guiding force in terms of being able to understand what do we need as an organization to move forward? What do we need in terms of the kind of compliance for construction? This includes compliance with federal preservation guidelines, state guidelines to the State Historic Preservation Office. We also needed to do tribal consultation because of its affiliation with indigenous communities in the past. We also needed to come up with marketing and communications, community programming, economic development, all of these different areas we needed to begin to focus our attention on and develop some strategies around each one of these different areas. So that was this was our roadmap to move forward. So what did we do? We started with deep listening. We reached out to all of these different communities, whether they're the Buffalo Soldier community, the community residents of Naco. We met with arts and culture communities within not just Naco and Bisbee, but Cochise County in general. And we did this in a variety of different places. The upper left-hand corner is at the Naco School, the other sort of institution that exists in Naco. We also did a lot of meetings online. We worked, and the one in the bottom right-hand corner is in the gay 90s, because we realized there is a community that convenes at the gay 90s. And we wanted that to be a convening place for people to feel comfortable to talk about the future of Camp Naco as a resource for the community of Naco. We also, as I mentioned before, we had stakeholders, including those related to our compliance obligation. And so there is archaeology on the site. It may not be associated with the Apaches or the Sobaipuri, who were the indigenous communities there before, but it was related to the historical archaeology that was there, the military history, and that chapter that was there. So there's a number of artifacts that were discovered on the site, and we need to have a plan in order to fulfill our compliance obligation, but also begin to retrieve that history as a means of telling that story moving forward. So we worked on an archaeological survey that was done, and now a treatment plan that is currently going out to the tribes for consultation so we can define how we move forward. We also met in the upper right-hand corner with our State Historic Preservation Office architect and archaeologist, who we invited to the site so that we could begin to learn how is that lens being approached here, and have them be not just compliance partners, but true partners in the developing of how to do this right and to be a model for how we preserve a site into the future. And we also invited preservation experts. This happens to be Chris Traeger from the U.S. Forest Service, who's an adobe expert, to come out and really help us define what are the specific treatments that we need for the adobe that was there at Camp Naco. So now I'm going to focus on some of those outcomes and sort of show you what we've been doing. So the first is the rehabilitation of the Camp Naco site. So I wanted to show you this aerial photograph here. And this, the drawing down below in white was one that was done by Helen Erickson, who's here in the crowd, as part of the story map. The reason Naco was there is because of the railroads. It was a railroad crossing for the mining that was going on between Cananea in northern Sonora, northeastern Sonora, all the way up into the Bisbee and Douglas area, all the way into the rail lines that led to the shipment of ore and other minerals and copper to other places throughout the country. Naco was a junction point between Sonora and Arizona. And so it becomes really important to identify the reasons that Naco existed. As a town, it began in 1905. This is not an old township, but it is an old place. And so when we take a look at this, the important thing to recognize here on this aerial is this is the border. This is the international border right here. The Camp Naco site in red is just a rifle shot away, basically, from the border, which was why it was there. We needed to have a camp to protect the economic interest, particularly in the railroad, of the Americans that had a lot of investments in this area, and protect it against the Mexican Revolution from spilling over across the border. The rest of the township of Naco, you can see, is laid out in a very systematic way. And then there is a town of Naco, Sonora. So like Nogales, there is an ambos Naco here. There's a Naco, Sonora, as well as a Naco, Arizona. And you can see the site here also. This is the rail line, the same rail line that you can see existing right here, going all the way up through here. And this went down into Mexico and then went across over into this line right here, going all the way over into Douglas. So remnants of those lines are still there. And right on the border of that is where our Camp Naco site is. So if we were to zoom in then, we can see that we're talking about the proposed uses for this Camp Naco site as proposed by the grants and now being validated by a series of stakeholder and community input sessions from all of the different constituent communities. So you can see, based on the aerial, we have a 17-acre site that includes about a third of it is open land here that we are trying to understand what is the best way to develop this. Again, trying to honor all of those three different pillars that we talked about as part of the vision that was there. In addition to the buildings, two of which are in ruinous states. These two are currently in ruinous states, and you'll see some images of them. You can see that in the aerial, they have no roofs right there. And you can see the configuration of the site is two quadrangles here, mostly made of barracks. There's an officers' club, a hospital, two mess halls right here, bathhouses, which we are proposing to become public restrooms here, and then a series of non-commissioned officers' quarters here, as well as officers' quarters on the south side of Newell Street. Again, this is a perfect opportunity to develop housing for workforce community, as well as artists and scholars and residents. So that's the vision as we're moving forward. And you can see through the other notes here, the development of a community event space here in this open quad, where there is no roofs on these two buildings, community meeting center, as well as a library in here, a museum and offices, and studios and workshops, as well as public restrooms there. And so here is the kind of the program as it's being presented to the community for validation. As I mentioned before, process becomes really important here. We want to propose something for feedback. That doesn't mean that it's etched in concrete. It means this is something to react to so that we can validate through a process of consensus building as we make final decisions in terms of what the site wants to be. So what did we have to do? There was a hell of a lot of site cleanup. Becky showed history of site cleanup being the dominant thing that volunteer groups would do over the last quarter of a century in terms of cleaning up Camp Naco. That continues on today. We may be using more PPE in our cleaning up as much as the volunteers did a decade ago, but that's being done now following the guidelines that have been set up by OSHA and by city regulations, because again, we want to be a model for how we do this. There was other cleanup that happened. There was an entire fallen wall here. So we have an entire adobe wall with windows and everything just fallen over that needs to be cleaned up and documented for future use. There's also a whole lot of landscaping. The landscape has really taken over the buildings that are here. So a lot of removal of trees and other kinds of vegetation that are there. And then there was the wildlife. We had owls nesting. These are barn owls, which are endangered species, nesting in the buildings, as well as bats. And so instead of deciding that we were just going to push them out and then just have them find another place, we said, no, wait a minute. Let's embrace the fact that wildlife like this place. This could be another reason to attract people to come to Camp Naco as a gateway entry into the site, and then have them leave learning more about Buffalo Soldiers or learning more about the history of Cochise County. So we recognize a variety of different audiences and gateways into which Camp Naco could be a nexus for them to begin to learn about a variety of different themes that were there. So here you see our construction project manager, Mike Normand, is installing an owl box. So instead of pushing them out, we are encouraging them to then nest on site, but just where we want them to be so that we can button up the buildings for human use. There was also emergency stabilization. This right here is the fallen wall that I showed you the image of, was right down here. This is the remainder of the standing walls of that particular structure. They were in danger of falling too. And so what we had to do, and there was 3 of these walls that needed to be stabilized. And so we hired a crew, again, using funding from the National Trust, as well as the Southwest Foundation for Historical Preservation, to begin to stabilize these walls, put up some buttresses to prevent the wind and other shear loads from pushing it over, and to begin to stabilize the adobe that was there. We also began the process in the last month of architectural programming. So again, as part of the consensus building and validation process, we took the proposed activities and the proposed uses, and we brought together all those constituent groups back to the table and said, now that you understand more about Camp Naco, let's validate what these are. And so these, again, have been meetings with a variety of different community groups that have included both in person, and you can see over Zoom here, we're meeting and talking about various site components that would be there, as well as building components. And this is being led by Corky Poster and his firm, now called Poster Murto McDonald, a Tucson-based firm. And as Becky said, is well known in terms of preservation circles here in Tucson and Southern Arizona. But again, it's about listening. It's about taking a concept and having it being validated. Because one of the mantras that we're using here is that the integrity of process will validate the outcomes as we move forward. And so we were very clear about being as transparent in this defining of process as we could. To the point where we even, on our website, put up the proposals so that we could have online feedback. We were looking for that level of detail and that level of validation. So the second component I want to talk about then of the outcomes was community programming. So we started with a launch event to bring as many people together. This was in February of 2023. It's over a year ago now, in honor of Black History Month, that we invited as many of the Buffalo Soldier groups as we possibly could to come and help celebrate the launching of the Camp Naco project. And you can see the audience that we had here. And we had an honored guest from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, Chris Morris, come out and give some keynote remarks there too. We also had what have become now a signature event for us, which is National Buffalo Soldier Day, which is in August. And so in August 2023, those of you who know Southern Arizona in August, was not a pleasant time. We had over 300 people there. And we had tents there. You can see we were trying to provide shade. We had no idea the amount of pent-up interest that there was in this. And this idea of celebrating these things in the place where we needed to commemorate these events at Camp Naco. And it became an opportunity for us to begin to partner with a number of different community organizations, particularly around the Buffalo Soldiers. The two speakers that you see in the bottom left-hand corner are from the Southwest Association of Buffalo Soldiers that is based in Sierra Vista. But we also have Buffalo Soldiers groups coming from all over the state. The gentleman down below here came all the way from Phoenix, Eric Reed, to begin to show off a lot of the Buffalo Soldier history that was related to other sites in Arizona. We also began an oral history project. And so we began using that event because we had so many people and we recognized this was an opportunity to capture those voices. We began an oral history project to capture as many of those voices as possible. It's part of our archive as well as part of our interpretive experiences. As I said before, we partnered with a variety of different Buffalo Soldier groups. There are a number in southern Arizona. There's one in Nogales, the Nogales Buffalo Soldier Legacy Association. We've been partnering with them for 2 years now. And this past year, when they had their annual celebration, they honored Camp Naco by presenting a memorial flag to Camp Naco as a gesture of partnership between the two organizations. We're also, as I mentioned before, partnering with the Sierra Vista-based SWABs, the Southwest Association of Buffalo Soldiers, where instead of having Black History Month, having competing events, one at Camp Naco, one in Sierra Vista, we combined efforts and created a document that's called In Your Pocket, Heroes of the Past, which are little profiles of Buffalo Soldiers. This was a joint event that allowed us to work together and cement a partnership because we wanted to define this kind of greater whole as opposed to these individual parts of units and organizations that were working as Buffalo Soldier advocacy groups. We also did a series, we started a kind of Q&A informal event that we called Fireplace Chats, taking advantage of this iconic fireplace that you saw in the video, the tribute video, but also as a backdrop for us to have conversations about themes related to the Camp Naco site. Our first inaugural one was with Dr. John Langelier, who is in the audience tonight, talking about his new book on the Buffalo Soldiers. This was so well received, we actually had to do 2 of these because we had so much interest in them. We also had a second one with Katie Benton, Dr. Katie Benton Cohen, who hosted then Dr. Larissa Veloz, who talked about women of the borderlands. And Dr. Benton Cohen is also in the audience tonight. We did this not at Camp Naco, but at the cafe in Bisbee called War and Peace. It's actually in the Warren community of Bisbee, so they called it War and Peace. And in this community, this was a great turnout that was there, but we also wanted to begin to broaden our themes that we talked about in these fireplace chats. So that it's not just about the Buffalo Soldiers, but it's about the other themes that were important to the site at Camp Naco. And just because we wanted to keep the theme going, we actually brought in an electric fireplace so that the fireplace chat theme could be continued on regardless of where we were going. As I mentioned before, we wanted to recognize that at Camp Naco, it wasn't just about the Buffalo Soldiers. That in the interpretive themes, historically speaking, we could talk about a whole host of different themes. Everything from prehistoric archaeology. So I don't know if you know that there is a mammoth kill site that dates back 10 or 12,000 years that is based right outside of Camp Naco. This was, if you talk to an archaeologist and you mention Naco, they immediately say, oh yeah, mammoth kill site. I know that place. And that's all they know about Naco. There's also the indigenous cultural landscapes. We mentioned them before. Those communities are the Sobaipuri O'odham, which are cousins of the Tohono O'odham, as well as the Chiricahua Apaches. We wanted to embrace that history there too. Obviously, we want to talk about the Spanish exploration. The reason that the Spanish borderland, or the Arizona borderlands exists is because of Spanish exploration. Mining and railroads and unions, oh my, there's a lot of stories there. The Mexican Revolution and the siege of Naco. The siege of Naco, Sonora was the longest siege of the Mexican Revolution. I didn't know that until I came onto this project. There is so much history at this place. Obviously the Buffalo Soldiers, but then you can talk about Native American guides, baseball, the Civilian Conservation Corps, who also had a chapter in the history of Camp Naco, the aerial bombardment of Naco, the only ground-to-air battle that ever took place on the continental United States, and also the civilian life that took place after the military left Camp Naco. There were families that were raised on Camp Naco, and there's a whole host of stories there. Those are just the historical themes. But we realized in order to make this relevant to all communities, we needed to define contemporary themes. And so our goal here was to create these contemporary through lines of historical themes. So instead of just talking about prehistoric archaeology and indigenous cultural landscapes, we needed to talk about land acknowledgement. We need to talk about reconciliation of conflicting cultural groups on this landscape and use this as a forum to begin to talk about how the next generation can come up with tools for reconciling the conflicted pasts. This has been done with the apartheid in South Africa. It's been done with slave communities. You're seeing it with the monuments projects in the South, and as well as places like the indigenous communities in Canada and the boarding schools that are there, internment camps that are happening. How do we reconcile these landscapes and the communities and the descendant generations of people that are there? We want to broach this kind of subject and use Camp Naco as a forum to talk about those. Talk about human migration, border security, social justice. I mentioned wildlife, climate adaptation. All of these are contemporary themes that have their roots in the historical themes that define Camp Naco. And these are the ones that we want to begin to define. This is why we brought in a scholar to talk about women on the Arizona borderlands. We want to begin to make this contemporary and relevant then for a variety of different communities. Finally, the third component of the outcomes was organizational sustainability. As I mentioned before, this is really about the organization of the Naco Heritage Alliance. So the first thing that we did was we created what might be considered an org chart to make sure everyone understood that on top of any nonprofit organization is the board of directors, not an executive director, a board of directors. They are the governing body that hires and fires an executive director and helps to guide what is that strategic vision for the organization. This has a dotted line connection to the City of Bisbee because the City of Bisbee actually owns Camp Naco. And so we're developing an MOU between the City of Bisbee and the Naco Heritage Alliance so that we can begin to partner that's there. We also have staff that will report to the executive director. Most of these are already in place. We have an administrative assistant, a construction project manager. The facility manager will take over for the construction project manager after the construction is finished. And we also have a marketing and communications specialist, a key component of our team. But we also have those same stakeholder groups that gave us information have now been refined and then convened into advisory groups. And these advisory groups will then help to inform and guide the process of how the strategic plan will be implemented. We need to talk about economic development. We need to talk about arts and culture. We need to have the Buffalo Soldier voice in all of these decisions. So now we have an advisory team infrastructure in place to help inform those decisions. We also have a timeline that we're working on. This one is a 4-year timeline, which is the grant period of the 2 grants that we have. And you see the red dotted line, the vertical line there is where we are today. But the important thing to recognize by this is by dividing these up into the 3 project outcomes, there's a recognition of the relationship between organizational administration and sustainability and site development construction, as well as community programming. One has to precede the other. We could not start construction unless we did compliance work. We could not start construction unless we listened to the community and got their input, okay? People would always say, well, when's the museum going to be open, right? Well, the museum is going to be open, where is the museum? Right down here, right? Not until 2025, because there's so much that needs to be done there. So part of this was managing the expectations of all of our communities to say, there are things that we need to do to establish a foundation for doing this right. And it's not going to be overnight, but we want this to be done right. And so part of this was mapping out as almost like a Gantt chart of project management, of key milestones that need to be done in order for us to move forward. And it really helped us create an understanding of what needs to be done and the process by which to do it. One of the most important components of this has been marketing and communications. So we've reached out and we have a lovely Camp Naco Arizona Illustrated short, and you can look it up if you're a PBS Passport member. You can look up Camp Naco on the website and pull up this wonderful video in Camp Naco and listening to Lobo Bazan talk about the relationship of the Buffalo Soldiers and what Camp Naco means to the Buffalo Soldiers. We also have been working with our preservation partners like the National Trust for Historic Preservation to begin to get our story out. This was on the 11 most endangered list. It got state funding as well as philanthropic funding. This is a big deal. And this isn't just a big deal for Arizona. This is a big deal nationally. And we have our partners there to begin to help us tell that story. And then also just being able to come up with very clear kind of graphic identity and to be able to tell the story in a very consistent way so we can have brand identity be associated with the values and the strategic plan that we're moving forward with. As I mentioned before, we now have a website. That website is located right down below here. Hopefully easy to remember. If you do pick up a bookmark on your way out, it also has a QR code for the website that's there too. But this has now become our clearinghouse. This becomes a place, for example, you can sign up for newsletters so you can get regular updates on what's going on at Camp Naco. We have created a series of videos that now are available on our YouTube, on our Camp Naco YouTube page. So we have a YouTube channel just for Camp Naco and the Naco Heritage Alliance. Again, we're wanting to create a repository and a clearinghouse for all this information and begin to then build that institutional infrastructure that's there. We also have to be good advocates. And being good advocates means that we need to have the right people be there to help us. And one of the first people that we reached out to was Governor Hobbs. This was money that came from the governor's office in the previous administration. This was Governor Ducey who actually awarded us the money. But we wanted to make sure that we understood the values and how Camp Naco could be a place to talk about workforce development, rural community development. This isn't just about a museum and about cultural heritage. This is about how can Camp Naco be a catalyst for the community of Naco and for southern Cochise County. So the governor graciously came to Camp Naco and got a tour around so that she began to understand. And now we have her staff members are on our advisory boards. So we have that ear in Phoenix to be able to listen to the work that we're doing. We also met on a trip to Washington, was able to meet with our congressional delegation, including Representative Grijalva. And this is, by the way, this is the State Historic Preservation Officer for the state of Arizona. This is Catherine Leonard, and those of you who know Representative Grijalva, he is a champion for not only environmental causes, but for also preservation. And he also is a champion for rural community development. And so we were able to begin, again, to lay out the vision for what Camp Naco could be, and begin to have his office help us. The same thing with Mark Kelly. Now, Mark Kelly has a special relationship to Camp Naco because of his wife. And so I pulled up, this is the photograph that Becky showed earlier of how Gabby Giffords had provided early support for Camp Naco back in, was it 2009? Was it? Something like that. And now has come full circle. So I wanted to make sure that when Senator Kelly was taking our photograph, that he had that picture of Gabby in his hands to recognize the full circle of how his office and the legacy of both he and his wife could continue to work at Camp Naco. That was a really special moment. We're also very pleased to continue to work with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. They have an African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund component, which is well endowed and is on a campaign to really begin to raise awareness about African American sites and to interpret African American history. This has been primarily focused in the East Coast. Again, you've probably heard all about this, whether it's memorials or slave quarters that are being reinterpreted. They had very little representation in the West. And so they saw Camp Naco as an opportunity to begin to talk about the African American legacy in the West in a way that hasn't been told in the past. And so we were leveraging that moment, invited the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund team out to Camp Naco to visit not just Camp Naco, but also African American sites here in Tucson, Fort Huachuca. We took them to the Dunbar Pavilion. We took them to the museum here on campus, as well as to the Center for Digital Humanities, which are doing wonderful things at Fort Huachuca. And out of that now has come, we are very pleased to announce that the HOPE crew, which stands for Hands-On Preservation Experiences, that HOPE crew is going to be assigning a crew of African American design, history, and preservation students from historically black colleges and universities to come out to Camp Naco to spend 2 weeks working on documentation project as part of their program. And so again, they've really focused only on the East Coast of taking these students and showing them African American sites. They are now taking them out to the West, to Camp Naco, so they can learn about this heritage and help us with the documentation of Camp Naco. This is a huge win for us in terms of just exposing Camp Naco as a site, but also raising the awareness about African American heritage in the West. And with that, thank you for your attention. Becky and I are open for any questions that you might have, but thank you for your attention.
So please let us know if you have some questions. Yeah, I'll come around.
You were talking about the artists' quarters component plans. Do you see this as a place for visual artists to work, or have you considered the possibility of a performing arts
Absolutely.
aspect to it?
Yeah, in fact, one of the slides, and we can go back to it, shows the This whole area is meant to be a stage for outdoor performing arts as well. So we have all arts, all the way to culinary arts, right? And so it's really meant to embrace the entire spectrum of artists.
Thank you.
Want to add anything?
And one of the things that we're looking at as we move forward is visual arts that are related to the history of the site being part of. Well, we've got to do some things. The sheriff's department said they didn't want to have it open so that people could drive through because we're right on the border and that's a problem. So we're thinking we'll have statuary or monuments in places, key places that will serve both of those roles.
Other questions?
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
I'll come.
Despite the dormant years, were there many archaeological items found at the site when work started to progress? I saw the one coin.
The site itself had such a long period of occupation. It's in a site. Of course, the Naco mammoth sites are within sight of where the site is, but we're kind of up on a flat ridge that wasn't really wasn't open for habitation for the most part. We have found a number of artifacts. The University of Arizona, Dr. Robert Schoen came down with students last year on World Archaeology Day. We had our students from Cochise College and students from Bisbee High School, and they did a survey and found things like buttons and buckles and those sorts of things. But it was also open territory for anybody with a metal detector for a lot of years. We're hoping to get a lot of those artifacts back.
Oh, hi. I am brimming with ideas and excitement that I'll discuss with you later. Two thoughts. One immediately came to mind with regard to the advisory committees. I've been lucky enough to be on this scholarly advisory committee for the new Wisconsin State Museum. And it's been really inspiring, and I had a lot of ideas around how that worked that I'd be happy to share. The substantive thing that I'm thinking about, I'm so impressed by how comprehensive this is. The one intellectual or maybe demographic or problematic piece that I see sort of missing, at least in this presentation, is really at some point engaging Mexican scholars, and 2024 is the centennial of the U.S. Border Patrol, and here we have, I mean, you alluded to this, a living history of the militarization of the U.S.-Mexico border and the ways in which African Americans were literally deployed to protect that increasingly racialized line. And so far, understandably, I mean, the Buffalo Soldier involvement is amazing. I kept thinking of my friend, this is one of those comments, not questions, because I'm a historian, you know, that's what we do. My friend Kelly Lytle Hernandez, who simultaneously wrote a book about the PLM, but also works on, you know, prison abolition and police reform in LA, and sees those as sort of twin projects. And I thought, what would she say about this? And I'm curious if you're engaging some of those things or scholars who work on those issues. A question.
First of all, Katie, would you like to be on our advisory committee? I think it's your point is spot on. We do have some Mexican colleagues that we've been engaging with. It's not enough, and part of this is that we're trying to lay this roadmap down and then basically staff it so that we can begin to reach out to all these different areas, whether it's arts and culture or economic development. All of these involve Mexico, right? The economic development is not just north of the border. This is about developing cultural tourism that is binational. And so we've had lots of conversations with our Mexican colleagues about trying to create something that really erases or at least diminishes the border, because the border is just a line in terms of the cultural history of this region. So yes, your point is well taken.
And we've had a pretty good working relationship, a very good working relationship with the museum in Naco, Sonora, that's dedicated to the siege of Naco, to that battle. Maria Elena Borges has been involved from the very beginning in a lot of discussions with us. And online when she can make it. She had some visa problems this year, so she hasn't been able to come over in person, but we're still connecting with her as much as we can. We've also had meetings with the Border Patrol. So we're trying to touch those bases.
Absolutely excellent program. I share the comments of the previous guest. Three-parter, but a quickie. How did you ever convince Bisbee to take it? Part two, what do you think Bisbee is going to get out of it? Part three, do you see this as a permanent relationship?
So I started talking to Bisbee very early on, and we went, every couple of years we have a new mayor, every 4 years, and it was part of that roller coaster. Interest came and went. We finally, Huachuca City taking it on. The mayor of Huachuca City had some ideas of his own, but it saved it. We couldn't have saved it without them taking it on. But once that mayor was no longer there, they were looking for answers. So in 2017, the new leadership there was somebody that I knew quite well personally, and I twisted his arm. I did a lot of tours down to the camp, talking to people about what it could bring because Naco Naco, Arizona is unincorporated, and there's no real entity there that could take it on. And when we, after the first arson fires, it turns out that the liability insurance was a major issue, why little groups like the SWAPs or Buffalo Soldier groups across the United States or the little historic society museums, none of them could take it on because they couldn't get it insured. And that was a major issue. And it had to take something like a Bisbee or a Naco or a Vision Quest that could put it in their insurance pool. So we knew that, and that because it is 8 miles from Bisbee, and Bisbee and Naco have a fairly close economic relationship. I mean, everybody in Naco shops in Bisbee. They were willing to take it to listen. And the current mayor and staff has been just amazing. It was through them that many of the grants got written after we got the National Register recognition. I'll tell you a quick story. We had applied Because we got that prize in Arizona for the best prize. Well, we applied for the 11 most endangered, but we didn't get it. But 2 days before they were to announce, we get a call from Chris Morris, who said, if you can get your paperwork in 2 days, you'll get named, because we had somebody drop off. So the city manager and I don't think we slept for 2 days, but we got it in. And he was willing to take that step. So they've been great stewards along the way, but always with the understanding that we were going to have to come up with the resources to take it forward. And now they're the fiscal agent for the $8.1 million, but with the idea that eventually, once we get a structure, they'll turn it over. And they have patterns for that already. The Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum and the Queen Mine Tour both are run by separate entities, but are owned by the City of Bisbee. And so they've got that model there, and that's the model that we'll be following.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm really impressed with the planning, organization, and vision that you guys are presenting for the development. That's really cool to see everything accelerating like this. Topic I know almost nothing about, but I keep hearing about: buffalo soldiers. I come from Missoula, Montana. We have a buffalo soldier history there at Fort Missoula. How widespread and interconnected is this buffalo soldier history in terms of organizations around the West?
Well, I've got a great story. So Missoula, Montana, 1880s. There were buffalo soldiers there. The U.S. military decided they wanted to switch from horses to So they got a group of buffalo soldiers from the 25th Infantry, wasn't it? Or 25th Infantry. Gave them bicycles, and they rode from there to Missouri. We're going to do a reenactment from Fort Huachuca, and the Iron Riders is what this group are called, from Fort Huachuca to Camp Naco this next year in recognition of part of that history. But following the Civil War and the couple of decades after, the basic army in the West were the soldiers who had been in the military at the end of the Civil War, and they saw that as an opportunity, first away from the racism that was in the East, but also they got the same amount of money as any soldier. So that was a big economic draw. And a large portion of the U.S. military in that few decades at the end of the 1800s were those 9th and 10th Cavalry, 25th Infantry, those Buffalo Soldier troops. So they were all over the West.
And if I could interject, during the reception, you should go and talk to this gentleman, Dr. John Langela. Could you raise your hand, John? He's a scholar of Buffalo Soldiers, and he would be a great conversation with.
Yeah, his book is one of the ones that we just did the chat on.
Well, that might be a good place to end it. And I just want to thank you so much for your presentation and all the incredible work that you're all doing in Naco. Thank you.